Hello and welcome to another Game Nexus arcade video. Today we're going to be taking yet another look at Soul Calibur, released in 1998 on the Namco System 12 arcade hardware. And of course, as I had mentioned in all of my previous videos, this is the world version where Arthur replaces Mitsurugi. And in this video, we're going to play as Xianghua, who ended up being one of my favorite characters in this game when I first played it. And one thing I like about this game is that her hair is like a little bit more red. In the Dreamcast version, if I recall correctly, her hair is actually a little bit more like darker, because I guess they changed it so it looked a little bit more standard. But Soul Calibur here was released back in 1998 in the arcades. I figure I'll just go through the releases here if you haven't watched any of my previous videos. But yeah, the Japanese arcade version on the Namco System 12 here was released on July 30th of 1998, with the North American and European versions coming out at some point that same year. Then of course, that next year in 1999, you had the Dreamcast version on August 5th in Japan, September 9th in the States for that iconic 9/9/99 Dreamcast release date, and then November 26th in European territories. There was an Xbox 360 arcade version on July 2nd of 2008, then there was an Apple, iPad, iPod, iOS version released on January 19th of 2012, and of course the Android version got released on November 20th of 2013, and I've made mention of it in just about every video. That version has since been delisted from the Play Store, so you can't actually buy that. You can only do it if your device allows you to install quote-unquote unsigned apps, if you have the APK and OBB data files. But the one thing that I always make mention of that never made any sense to me is that the Xbox 360 arcade version lacked online play, because that would have been killer, playing this game online with everybody without having to like go through some kind of emulator that allows you to do that, and just have kind of a plug-and-play version. Now, if this is your first Soul Calibur arcade version video, you'll be noticing the gameplay doesn't look nearly as sharp as the Dreamcast version, because it was based off of like a souped up PlayStation spec, with the Namco System 11 being like standard PlayStation, and then Namco System 12 being ever so upgraded with more RAM and better clock speeds of the processors and everything. But in general, everything still ends up looking really nice because you still have your 3D backgrounds, but you get a little bit of that like PlayStation jitter that you wouldn't with the Dreamcast version, because it doesn't have that type of like dithering that happens with the graphics. But yeah, Soul Calibur here was a really nice game, and the funny part about me is I never actually heard much about this series until Soul Calibur came out on Dreamcast. A friend of mine actually had a Dreamcast and he brought it over and we played a few rounds. I was like, wow, that's a really cool game. And the funny part is, it wasn't too long after that I found out about Soul Blade, this game's prequel, and then I got the game on Sony PlayStation and kind of got acquainted with some of the characters from the series from that game. And then eventually, when I got my own Dreamcast, I ended up playing, of course, a lot of Soul Calibur, unlocking all the characters, getting through all the single-player modes and everything, and yeah, it was really fun when I finally ended up getting my own Dreamcast to play this game. And as I had made mention of in my my Edgemaster gameplay, you can really notice if you're playing as Edgemaster or playing against Inferno if I had a loss, but since I'm playing against Lizardman here as Xianghua, you didn't really notice that I actually had a loss there, and it was actually fairly seamless. But with Edgemaster or Inferno, the weapon they're imitating in the like little intro part there will be different from what you'll actually face, because it will change in every round. So you can easily notice that. And now in this game, it will actually say press kick for a third model, which is what I did when I played as Xianghua here. And I believe in the Dreamcast version, it was just a specific button regardless of how your controller was set up, so it's not actually kick. It was one of the face buttons on the Dreamcast controller that let you play as a third model. And then, of course, there were other options you could unlock in that game, including Edgemaster weapon, so your regular character would then be using the weapon Edgemaster would use when he plays as them. And then, if I recall correctly, there was also the basically the metal character, so they would be completely reflective. If you've ever played a Mario game that had Metal Mario, basically think of this as the same idea, where you would have the character who would have the, like, Terminator, T-1000 metal coating that reflected world. And of course, for the Dreamcast, that was quite the impressive effect, so you could have that, like, reflection going on. And I always thought that was a really cool feature of some of these games, where they'd have that, like, metal mode, if you will. Of course, it was legitimately a gimmick, but it was always a cool little unlockable. But if you didn't know, the way that Soul Calibur works is that it is a 4-button game. You have your vertical slash, your horizontal slash, your kick, and your guard. And then, of course, a lot of moves are actually done by pressing vertical and horizontal slash together. I remember when I used to play this on Dreamcast, I would have the Y button as vertical and horizontal slash together. Then I would have A and B as vertical and horizontal slash respectively. And then I'd have the X button. Yeah, I think that's the X button, which on the when I configure this stuff in OpenJVS, that's considered east, because it is the, you know, if you look at a compass, it would be where the E would be for your compass. And then I would have, like, guard set up on one of the shoulder buttons, because when you're holding your Dreamcast controller, your finger's naturally on the shoulder button, so you can easily grip that if you need the guard. And that's usually how I ended up playing Soul Calibur when I would play it in the home version. And I believe for Soul Blade on PlayStation, I actually did a similar thing. And that's kind of the configuration I got used to when I was playing any of the Project Soul games here. And yeah, as I was mentioning in my Edgemaster gameplay, I definitely have to appreciate the backgrounds in this game. They might not be the most high poly, but there's a lot of 3D elements, such as those buildings over there, and it just gives the game, like, a lot more sense of, like, quote-unquote realism, that everything is not just flat like in the earlier Tekken games. And I believe in Soul Blade it didn't have 3D backgrounds, because the Namco System 12 here gives you that ability to have a bit more graphics fidelity. And even in, like, the texture work here, where you see Nightmare's outfit, you can see a lot of the extra, like, texture mapping they did just to make the game look a little bit better. And even on the floor, when you look down at it, you can see that fine brick texture is just really nice in this game. And keep in mind, unlike when I played Soul Blade on my PlayStation for a video I made for that, there's no smoothing filter applied here. What you see on the floor there is actually just what the Namco System 12 produces, because I can remember in Soul Blade, a lot of the textures on the floors, they were there, but they were just kind of pixelated, whereas if you played that game on PlayStation 2 and turned on the smoothing, it would actually make the floor look a lot more smooth, which was actually a really cool feature that I liked back in the day. But for Soul Calibur here, you don't need that, because the Namco System 12 is able to texture map a lot smoother with its extra power, so you don't have that, like, very bad pixelization you would see on the Namco System 11, because it kind of was like fully unfiltered PlayStation 1 spec. And I do plan to eventually do a lot more Soul Blade videos in both the Soul Blade original version and the version 2, because I own both of those PCBs, and that's kind of a plan for the future, if you will, for future arcade videos when I release more Soul Blade videos. And now here's our dramatic nightmare coming here. And that's one thing in Xianghua's video here that you don't see in the other characters. Instead of just having her regular weapon, her weapon transforms into the legendary sword Soul Calibur. I don't know if it makes your like attack strength any stronger or if it's legitimately just an aesthetic change, but it's kind of a cool little thing there, so you can kind of see that her sword turns from just like a plain old regular sword into the title sword Soul Calibur, whereas what Inferno's using here is the previous game's namesake, Soul Edge, which, as I'd made mention in tons of videos by now, the actual name of that game got changed to Soul Blade because they were afraid that Edge magazine in the US, I believe, I think there was also a store called Edge in other countries, would call copyright, but from what I understand, even in the arcade versions, none of that ever happened, but it was kind of one of those, an abundance of caution, just to make sure you don't get sued for names. But I know, as I made mention of in Inferno's video, you can easily tell who Inferno, or in this case, well, Inferno or Edgemaster are imitating. In this case, it's Yoshimitsu, because it's just so easy to see a lot of the weapon styles in this game, as it's not, oh, well, this character swings their arms like this, so it's definitely this character that is being imitated here. And this was definitely one of those matches that I was thinking, oh, there's no way I'm going to win. And if this were Tekken, I'm sure the announcer would just right then went, great. Because if you've never played Tekken, when you win with just a little bit of health left, you always get a great, which is really cool. And here's Xianghua's ending. Okay, and as I made mention of in my previous videos, although Soul Edge / Blade had a similar style of endings like that, where it would just show them in a book, when they released that game for home, they actually changed it to full in-engine videos of the characters doing their, like, acting out their endings, whereas in Soul Calibur, from what I understand, they decided not to do that, and they just kind of left these same endings. So, a little bit disappointing, but, you know, it's still pretty cool to see in this, like, legendary style, if you will, what it looks like when the character has their ending. But definitely have to recommend Soul Calibur as an arcade game to play. If you've never tried it before, I'd highly recommend it. As I know I've made mention in several of my videos, I've actually played this once in the arcades, but it was like years after it was like the newest game, and it was kind of like in the local arcade here, and they had a Soul Calibur machine, and it was just kind of cool to see what it finally looked like in the arcades. And I think that was long before MAME even attempted to emulate this game, or any of the derivative, like, PlayStation-based arcade emulators could even run anything, like, worth a mention. that I finally saw Soul Calibur in the arcades, and it was kind of cool that I at least got a little bit of arcade play, if you will, where I could see the game in its original form. But yeah, definitely give a shot to Soul Calibur in the arcades, or if you can't play it on Dreamcast or Xbox or your old iPhone or Android device, because it's definitely a very fun game to play, and it's well worth your time. Even if you've played the latest entries, the original game, in my opinion, is still one of my favorites. And of course, here are our win counts, which actually are the data in the game. It just doesn't track the percentages for some reason. But yeah, this has been another Game Nexus Arcade video, and I shall see you later. Bye.